Hello, everyone. We are now in Module 5, and we're going to continue with our traditional overview of media. And I just want to address a couple of things starting with this module. First of all, I understand that I would say that 80 to 90% of the students that sign up for this class, and I'm talking about not the undergraduate but even the graduates, are maybe professionals but not necessarily versed in what media is. Remember that I said at the beginning of the course that I'm going to be talking about the business of media. And the business of media includes planning, buying, and selling, not necessarily just the planning aspect. That being said, I do have to make sure that all of you understand what each media has. And I'm talking traditional media because that's what we've been focusing on, starting with television, and then now with radio, out of home, print. Understanding that each media has a digital versions and digital interactions. Digital, we're gonna cover starting after exam number 2, we're gonna get into digital. But also understand that the digital landscape just changes so quickly that for me as a professor, it's easier to give you the basics, some of the basic KPIs, which I'm going to cover, but also giving you the option of doing the certificate, which I think was a great addition to the course because of everything I've explained already. You can highlight that in your LinkedIn profile and just be very marketable. So suffice to say that for me, this class is very basic. It may be basic for some of you that have great experience or you're working in the field. Technically should be media planning 1 and 2. In the ideal world, I was very lucky to get in media planning 1, which is the class that you're taking. So for those of you that are more advanced, just be patient. I appreciate all your comments. So if there's anything that you would like to see or you think that I should address differently because you have that experience, please feel free to call me. In any case, let's start with the business of radio. And again, this is traditional radio. And another thing that I want to cover and stress, and I said this in modules 1 or 2 or both, is that I was going to spend time in television because it allowed me to teach the concept of supply and demand. Because in television, and I'm talking linear television, I'm not talking about subscription based or on demand. I'm talking linear television, the television that you sit in front of the TV and you turn it on and you see news and you see local programming or network with local. That's the type of television that I'm talking about. And with TV, one of the things that the reason why I start and I stay talking about the medium a little bit longer is because it is the way that I have found to give you the concept of supply and demand, because you cannot add a second to a day to create inventory like you can in other media. For example, in print, you can add pages. Even in digital, you can add channels. In out of home, you can add, billboards or street furniture. But in broadcast is radio and television, you cannot add a second to create inventory. You can create other properties. You can create events. You can sell digital along with linear. but you cannot add a second of the day to create inventory. So that concept of finite inventory and how that drives pricing, to me, is very important to help you guys understand very early on when you're trying to evaluate different platforms. That being said, let's, again, I'm not gonna get into the media math in these recordings. I'm just gonna go over, the most basic concepts. In this one, we're gonna talk about radio. Radio, remember, we're not talking about digital, we're talking about terrestrial radio, because you have satellite, you have digital radio, and then you have, terrestrial radio. So terrestrial radio in a marketplace operates like television when you have a broadcast station. It is a physical station with an antenna throwing a signal out into the marketplace. And that's why, it's regulated by the FCC, because, the airwaves are, you can get it for free. So that technically there's no barrier to entry like you would have, for example, in satellite radio, that you can get more risque because, like a Howard Stern, for example, because there's a barrier to entry, you have to pay. In terrestrial radio, you can get it for free and in your car, and hence why the regulations from the FCC is far more strict, like you have also in broadcast television versus cable, for example. So you find, we find over 15,000 radio stations in the US. And, I need to talk to some radio executives now in 2021 to see if the business, post-pandemic or during the pandemic has been affected, it's flat, it's decreased. One of the things that we know is that more people in lockdown kind of increase ratings and consumption of media, because, looking for entertainment that you didn't have otherwise, because you had to be in some sort of a lockdown. So it would be very interesting to talk to specific, sales professionals or buyers or planners, more buyers, because they have, a better feel for the marketplace. So it could be interesting to see, how's the business, of radio. Also understand, and again, we're going to talk about the lingo, that radio speak is, when you talk about radio speak, is radio formats. And what radio formats mean, and I'm going to show you a slide that has several formats, is programming. When you say, for example, that a radio station is a rock station, it's because that's what they do. Or talk radio, or sports radio, or adult contemporary radio, or 90s radio, what have you. So just understand that in radio format, sorry, it's thundering outside. I don't know if you can hear the thunder. But you talk about content, and content is, in radio, is called a format. These are, again, I'm not going to go over all these, but these are, the different formats, radio, adult contemporary, rock, alternative rock, classic rock, contemporary hit radio. And again, every radio station is going to, position itself based on the format, the type of programming that they broadcast. These are more different formats, so that you have an idea. And one of the things that I was explaining is that in radio, just think that you have terrestrial, digital, and satellite. And again, I'm putting here some pros and cons. And again, in terrestrial radio, One of the things that you have to keep in mind is that it's a very local type of medium. And also that is radio is great for promotions. And I've worked in radio and I've bought radio, so I've been on both sides of the fence. But one of the things that I use radios for my client, particularly if I was running, let's say, a supermarket promotion for a consumer packaged goods like Procter or Unilever, or some of those type of brands. Radio was great because you can take the radio station, you can drive traffic to a promotion for that particular client. It goes hand in hand with events. So it's a very interesting, locally driven type of, medium. Now, satellite is another thing because satellite tends to be far more national in nature. So radio, and again, I'm going to go through all the pros and cons and understand what that means. One of the things is that radio is very flexible and schedules can be altered on a short notice. So you can call if you're a buyer, calling the rep and letting them know that, something is changing, creative is changing. It has that ability to be able to, react to changes on a very short notice. It's great, as I was saying, for promoting events because it goes hand in hand because of the promotional nature of radio. You can target messages and audiences because, again, if somebody likes rock, there's a very psychographic profile that you can do for that particular type of audience. If they have a digital component, even more so, you're expanding your reach beyond the car or what have you. It could be, if it's digital, it could be on demand. In radio, you have, again, the peak times for television tend to be prime time. And prime time, as you probably remember from the television portion, is Monday through Saturday, 8 to 11, Sunday, 7 to 11. Those are your traditional peak times with television. But in radio, and again, think of and these things can change, and each market may be different because there's some markets that, and this is the way that you have to think, and you have to think locally. Some markets, like a New York, for example, people take public transportation far more because they have an efficient public transportation system. Here, for example, in South Florida, where I'm located, South Florida is a car market, even though there's a public system, but people use cars more. So in regular, again, I'm not talking pandemic, in regular patterns, that your peak times are driving times. So morning, if you're going to work, evening or afternoon, if you're coming back. So those are your peak times, is your drive times, morning drive, afternoon drive. One thing for radio, and again, remember that what you have learned, media is priced on impressions, how many people are listening, or it can also be priced on supply and demand. It can also be priced if a particular program reaches a very specific audience, so that audience maybe has a bigger, price because of the niche, the very targeted audience that you're reaching. So station management is always going to decide how they're going to price their inventory and how competitive they are in the marketplace. But, and again, I'm talking more generalities, radio tends to be less expensive than television because television tends to be a more reach type of medium. Radio is more of a frequency medium. So here you have usually good audiences targeted by demographics and taste, and you know, what do you call it? You know, what they want to listen to. You can have a very good listener loyalty. Remember, you know, also in radio, you're very driven by personalities. When I was working in radio, that was the case. The personalities were, you know, celebrities, so to speak. So that they develop a very loyal listening audience. And it could have a very high amount of time spent listening, which is one of the metrics when you know, Nielsen Audio is you know, measuring radio like they do with television. But here they have a metric called time spent listening. How much time, you know, does this person spend on this station, you know, versus another station that may have a similar format. And then stations here, and again, this is true for other stations, but radio, because it's so promotional in nature, it has a very interesting threshold for added value if you negotiate. And always remember that added value or value added, what it is what can you give me above and beyond the inventory or properties that I'm paying. And this is all negotiable. Okay, so the cons, also, you know, think about yourselves and how you listen, you know, to background music. Radio tends to be a background type of medium. People are doing other things while listening. The audiences may be declining, you know, again, take this with a grain of salt and station by station, but also understand in that, you know, statement, what are you competing with for your share of ears? And again, people have far more, you know, options, including podcasting. I mean, I'm a huge podcast listener, you know, in my on-the-go devices. So, you know, I could be listening to this, or I could be listening to that. And remember, internet enables cars. Now you're competing with the internet along with terrestrial radio. So that's, again, the share of ear. What are people listening to, or what are their options? Also understand, and again, this is, you know, true of other media, depending on, you know, the formats of the advertisements, but you have time constraints in terms of spot length. What is the most typical spot length in radio? Like you find in television, tends to be a 30-second commercial. You know, that's the most traditional format for TV commercials. In radio is 60 seconds. So it's longer. Why is it longer? Well, because remember that in radio, you don't have the, you know, the luxury of having a visual, you know, to go along with the commercial message. So, you know, I had a rule of thumb when I was writing copy for radio, which once, you know, I have to repeat, you know, whatever it is that the audience needs to take away from that ad, you know, repeat it at least 3 times, so that if people are driving, you know, that message kind of sticks in their mind, and maybe they can research more, like go to this website, or maybe call this number if it's a number that is easy to remember. But that was my rule of thumb, you know, 3 times in a, you know, repeated 3 times, whatever you want the audience to take away. Everybody, you know, may develop their own system. That was mine. So, you know, geo-targeting may be challenging in the cons. Why? Because remember, in terrestrial radio, you have a very, you know, very defined coverage area. And that geographical, if you want to concentrate, and this happens also in broadcast TV stations, not in cable stations, because it's a different dynamic. But when you have that antenna throwing that signal, you cannot target specific geographic areas. For example, like you can do in cable, that you can have a campaign running for this market because the commercials can be served geographically to that market, because cable operates, throwing the signal through radio and not necessarily through a, air signal. And commercials can be very easily lost in the clutter because people, skip. And again, this is very true from any media. But in radio broadcast, people can change the station, or they can, tune out or surf. And the other thing, and again, this is very interesting concept for all media. It may be difficult to measure unless you put a mechanism to measure. Like, for example, I was watching, and again, this is streaming, but it applies. I was watching a show on Hulu, and there, that particular show was sponsored by HelloFresh, delivery of meals. So they have a very specific code. If you want to sign up for the service, sign up, and get a discount. And then at the end, the file extension that, or thing that you have to kind of type in is a code that identifies that particular show. So, that's a way of knowing how much business is coming from that particular sponsorship. So that may be difficult in radio unless you have a mechanism to track. And these are some, lingo. Remember that you have the module Bible that is going to go in depth into glossary so that you can understand how to speak radio. But, you have your day parts, and your day parts are your drive times, and again, we're going to look at it. You're going to work with a radio rate card or a veil. But what are the most typical ones? Morning drive, midday, PM drive or afternoon drive, evening, and again, weekend, overnights. There's other day parts that come into play. And one thing that I want to mention in radio, because, I've worked in radio quite a bit, in terrestrial radio, the station management can define what their morning drive times are going to be. For example, your traditional morning drive is from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. But I had a station that when I was negotiating with them, they considered their morning drive 5 a.m. to 11 a.m. And again, every market is different, every station is different. And one thing that you can do if you're a buyer is you can still narrow down that particular day part. If you feel that you don't want to run as early as 5 a.m. or as late as 10 to 11 a.m., you can always tell the station, no, I want 6 to 10, because that's where maybe the bulk of their audiences for morning drive is. But also understand that if you narrow down those parameters, be prepared to pay a premium for it if that's what you want. And again, it's all in the negotiation, and it's all how good a negotiator you are, and how persistent you can be. But those are things that also remember, I'm talking to you more general and traditional, but every station management has their own way of selling and pricing their inventory. And the last point here on this slide is your run of station, or ROS, which again, it may vary by the station, and it may vary by the definition. You may have an ROS that may be, 6 a.m. to midnight. That may be an ROS. Or you may have an ROS that is as wide as Monday through Sunday, 6 a.m. to midnight. So always remember, the more freedom that you give a station of placement, your reward, if you're the buyer, is going to be a lesser rate. But again, you have to be very open to paying a premium or paying less expensive the wider your ROS are. But again, since you have the concept of posting, be very cognizant that, if you're running ROS, run of station schedules, the posting, you have to literally cover for if your spots are running on a lesser ratings and impressions type of, placement. So you have to, if you're the buyer, you have to ensure your post. And this is something that through stewardship, you can mitigate the dangers of not posting, by, being on top of your schedule as necessary. So again, word of caution for an ROS. And as I was saying, these are your different types of radio, terrestrial or analog, which is station, signal, and a physical presence in the marketplace. You have satellite radio, which some of you, may have in your cars. This is, you have to pay a subscription. And then you have your digital, which is for the most part, a station, even though you have, 100% digital stations. But what has been the trend is that if you have a terrestrial station, they're going to have a digital component for streaming music. Okay. So, and again, since we're talking audio, consider podcasting. Podcasting is huge. I am sure that many of you, if not all of you, because of the demographic, are podcast listeners. And you can read here, the pros and cons of radio versus podcast. Remember that podcast is on demand. It can be extremely good if it's like a Joe Rogan that, has a humongous following. Again, that's going to be priced based on listeners and impressions. But also understand that, it's very niche. It's by the topic. It has to do also with, how the talent, etc. Okay. So in radio negotiations, these are things that you can, negotiate. For example, equal distribution if you're buying an ROS, or you're buying different day parts. Remember fixed position, you already went through this on the last module. This fixed position is an anchor position, and it's scheduled to run at a precise time. Your rates are that, how much are you paying for it? Production. Production is interesting in radio. And one of the things that I appreciated when I was selling radio is that producing a radio spot was fairly simple. If that advertiser didn't have a radio spot, it was something that I negotiated with the station. And I told them, okay, I would like to maybe contract this, radio personality that maybe had a, had a following, a very distinctive voice. And you can, pay that particular station, pay the talent, they get in, in a recording booth, and boom, you have a spot. It's far more complicated in TV because it's more production. You have the visual, but in radio, for the most part, when I was selling radio, the advertiser not having a radio spot was less of a hassle to get them on the air because the production was far more simple than doing a TV production. Remember that, again, value added, or added value in bonus spots. These free spots can be part of the schedule as well. You just have to negotiate it in the package. Sponsorships, again, this functions like any other media. Sponsorships are, brought to you by type of, ads, advertisements, and remotes. The remotes are interesting in radio. They're less frequent in television, but in radio, being such a promotional medium, having a radio remote is having the physical station, with talent and broadcasting from that locality. That's why sometimes, and this is very used by retail, by car dealerships, that you will have a radio station doing what they call live cut-ins. Come on down, we're having a great sales. You can test drive a car, or something that I did very effectively with radio and some of the clients when I was on the agency side was having actors and celebrities, if they were, part of the campaigns, having them come for autograph signings. And again, that's where you bring in the station and they do live cut-ins, or they promote, that the artist is going to be there signing autographs. So, again, think that radio and terrestrial radio is very much used for promotions. And okay, so this is just an example of a radio rate card. And again, I pulled this from the internet, but it's just to give you a chance to get familiar with how a radio rate card may be priced. And one of the things, and again, this is not, a made up, this is actually a rate card that I found. And one of the things that I found particularly interesting, and you're going to see this in your radio, math problem in this module, is that the legend in the bottom tells you that the 30%, the 30-second spots are 75% of a 60. So, or a 10-second spot are 40% of a 60. Again, this is a matter of learning how to, use math to calculate. Okay, if I want to do a 30-second commercial, what I'm looking at here are a 60-second rate card, because the 60-second tends to be, your more common and traditional unit length in radio. So all you have to do is take 75% of that, rate right there. And now you can plan your buy because you're using a 30-second rate and not necessarily call your rep. The other thing that is very interesting in this particular rate card, and I want to make sure in this, lesson and make you guys understand now, because you learned that in module 1, that there's a difference between a net rate and a gross rate. And again, I mentioned that in module 1. And that difference is the media commission, because again, whatever's negotiated between the agency and the client is, the client may tell you, we're not going to be paying for commissions, or the traditional commission, media commission rate is 15%. So between agency and client, there may be a negotiation going on how much the client is willing to pay a media commission or not. You probably remember from the Kevin Allen interview that we get into how the way media works, that he said, okay, that media commission may be inexistent at a 15%, which is the way that it was conceived. So you have that sliding scale that we talked about on module 1. or no commission at all. But that being said, and this is where I want you guys to be very clear, and you have to ask the question. If you're, let's say, on the agency side, and you ask for avails or a rate card, and the media issues, and they're not clear if they're gross or net rates, because still the difference between a gross rate and a net rate is that 15% media commission. Whether the agency gets to keep that 15%, that's between the agency and the client. But the difference between a gross and a net rate, which is one thing that you're going to learn in this, and again, that hasn't changed. Media may issue you net rates, and if you're working with a 15% agency commission, you gross it up. You're going to learn how to do that, in this lesson. So I hope this is clear. You may be working without media commission, but if you receive gross rates, that means that 15% is being added to the rate. And this is what, it says down here, that these rates that you're looking at in this rate card, which is a real rate card, are net to the station. So they're issuing net rates, not gross rates, not with that, 15% added. So you're going to have to, work with these numbers again. This is a matter of getting you used to what you may encounter out there. And you may work with radio, you may not work with radio, but you need to understand, what radio is, what it can do. And the other thing that I want to just mention, because I've talked about this with television, is that this is very typical for broadcast. You have your general manager, which is the person that manages and it's the head of a station. It's the GM or general manager. Then you have your sales department, and your sales department has a general sales manager or GSM, a national sales manager, or an NSM. That's the person that, for example, they deal with agencies or advertisers that are not in that local market. The buy may be coming from someplace else, not locally. You have your national reps, which again, you may have the station in, let's say, South Florida. If the buy is coming from, let's say, J. Walter Thompson in Atlanta, to run in that local Miami station, who handles that particular negotiation is the national sales manager. But if that particular station is being represented by a national rep firm, how we call it, then it's that rep firm in the Atlanta market calling on that buyer. And then once that negotiation is set, it gets sent to the local station, but it's handled by the NSM, the national sales manager. So you have your local sales managers, and again, is the local sales manager and the local reps or the local sales force is to handle the local clients that are not regional or national in nature. So for example, a retailer that only exists in that market, or even if they're regional, but they're doing a local promotion, local campaign, that would be considered local. If the buy is coming out of that particular market. If it's coming from another market, remember that it becomes national, then NSM handles that. Okay, so you have your finance department. This is huge, because these are the people that basically do collections, they handle all the accounting. Then you have programming, the program department. You always have a program director. This person is extremely important, just like in broadcast television. because they're the ones that, program what's going to happen during the day. So you can imagine, artists that want their music played in top radio stations. Is the programming director that makes those calls, and what the rotation of content is going to look like or sound like. Then you have your on-air talent, you have your engineers, you have production, you have research. Research, you put it serves a lot of programming because it tells the programming director what audiences are reacting to. But remember that research also helps the sales department sell. Traffic, again, I've talked about traffic in television. Traffic is the department that basically connects the, intakes the, the spot that's going to air for that particular advertiser. But when you have a traffic department in any media, they're the ones that basically match a contract, the way that it's ordered, with the actual times that, they're assigning during the week, during the day, to that particular advertiser. So they're Grand Central Station to place local contracts and inventory. So they have a feel to, what, day part is open, meaning they have inventory, what day parts are, sold out. That comes from traffic. Then you have promotion, because remember, radio is a highly promotional media. So you have promotion director, you have assistants, and then you have news. Remember that, radio, just like television, because of the locality, the local nature of the medium, they serve local audiences. And the way that you sell local audiences are with news, with weather, and with traffic. That's what, people may tune to radio or local television for. Okay, so moving on. Remember that radio is measured by now Nielsen Audio. It used to be Arbitron, but Nielsen bought Arbitron and became Nielsen Audio. And there's two types of methodologies to measure radio. Remember, you cannot go person by person to see what they're listening. So they have to recruit a sample, a local sample of traditional listeners. And they may be given a diary, because radio is still rolling out the personal people meter, which is like a little beeper that basically, just like in television, it picks up what that person who is in the panel is listening to, and it sends that particular preference to Nielsen Audio, and they tabulate ratings and impressions that way. Very simplistically, because I'm not an engineer, but that's what the PPM is. It's like a beeper that people in the panel that Nielsen recruited and is studying to understand the behavior at large in the marketplace. That's one of the methodologies to and more accurate than the diaries. I believe that you may have read an article about the imperfection of diaries to measure television or radio, because you're dealing with people's memories and the ability to write down and remember that they have to write down what they're listening to. Okay, so moving on. And again, I'm not going to go through the radio rate card example. There's a video and separate video that you can listen to. And again, this is very simplistic, guys. It's working with a radio rate card and knowing what to do and how to interpret not only the card but the numbers. And moving on to module 5.2. And we're going to talk here about the business of print. Again, if we're dealing with rate cards, I'm not going to go into the media math, but there's some things that you need to know and understand. See the examples of a media kit in the module, but understand that some of you may have dealt with media kits. They're not the same as a media kit as you would understand it in PR. The media kit is designed for that particular media vehicle to tell the buyer what they offer. What are their strengths, what their audience looks like. Just look at the example so you get an idea. But it's basically, a tool for the media to make the buyer understand that if you're looking for this audience, we have them. And the media kit, by the way, includes what's the the composition of the audience, purchasing power, case studies. For example, past advertisers that advertised with that station, and they had great results. Their editorial policy, if you're talking about print. So what does their content look like? What is the relevance of that content for the advertiser? A calendar of upcoming events, etc., etc. The rate card. Again, when you're talking traditional print basically goes by the rate card. It doesn't mean that things are not negotiable. Everything is negotiable. But because, they have, and I'm talking physical print, not digital versions of print that can be, again, you're going to be dealing with KPIs that are digital in nature. But in traditional print, publications publish what is called a rate card. This is, the format, the dimensions, and in this particular section, and this is how much we charge for it, and it's very black and white. Again, because they're still, driven by supply and demand. But remember what I said at the beginning of this lesson, that you can add a page to a publication, but you cannot add a second to broadcast to create inventory. So production requirements, that's also in the media kit. What can you tell your production people when they're producing their ads? The coverage maps, again, in print, it could be where is this distributed? Is it if it's a newsstand, the difference between newsstand sales and subscription sales, which may be, very telling. If it has a very high subscription base, it means that's a loyal audience, to that particular publication. And billing is what are the payment requirements? How do you pay that station for placements? Here, I am giving you, again, taking a piece of a media kit and pointing a few things out to you so that you know how to read this. If you look at number 4, where I have the first arrow, the top arrow, it says agency commission, 15% to recognized agency. So that means if we're giving you gross rates, we're going to respect that you're going to keep 15%. So if you're a recognized agency, and by the way, when I was in sales, savvy retailers would tell you, no, we have an in-house agency that does our placement, but because what they were looking for was a 15% recognition, which could have served as a discount because technically they had an in-house agency. So sometimes you take those contracts to, if you're in sales, you take those contracts to your LSM and they decide if to recognize, or they may ask for a paperwork, if they're going to recognize an in-house agency for a particular advertiser in order to recognize that 15% agency commission. And then the other thing that I'm pointing out here in number 6 is payment conditions to pay the invoice. For example, it says here, orders 30 days beyond current closing day will be accepted, et cetera, et cetera. So again, if you're, negotiating this, and this is more for the finance department at the station or at the agency, this is what media is telling you the way that, they expect to be paid for, the contracts. Here, very important, because in print, you have to make sure that they are measured somehow. If it's a large publication, you are going to get, get them audited by the Alliance for Audited Media, or AAM. In print, this is the Nielsen, of broadcast. But again, if it's a third party, industry accepted, company to audit circulation and audience, then that buyer can rest assured that those numbers are accurate. If it's a media, reporting their audience, you can take, and they're not audited, because you find a lot of little publications in markets. Maybe you go to the supermarket and you see, all kinds of free publications there with advertisers. If those advertisers are not, if that publication is not audited by an AAM, you have to take what the media tells you that their audience and their impressions are with a grain of salt, because it's a self-report, not a, industry accepted, type of audience report. And then the other thing that I'm pointing out is cancellation policies, because, again, if you're going to cancel or back out of a contract that you already placed, how is the media handling that particular cancellation? That may be spelled out in the media kit. The other thing that I want to, point out in this particular media kit is, that they are telling you, listen, we are audited. This publication is audited by the Alliance for Audited Media. And remember when I told you about, subscription versus newsstand sales, or how much of that audience is coming from their digital versions versus their physical print versions? That's what you find in this particular page of the media kit. The other thing that you may see, that you're seeing here, is, if they give you this particular information, always remember in the bottom, what you're going to find is what's the source for those numbers. If you don't see a source, but they're throwing out statistics at you, ask them for the source. Is that coming from the AAM? If it's self-report, a self-study. So if you are making determinations of where to run your campaigns, ask the questions so that the media can answer where are their numbers coming from. Because remember, audience number are going to reflect on rates. And if they cannot justify those rates, again, then you have to make the determinations of, who's their competition and where do you want to place your dollars if you're, on the buying side. Okay, moving on. Again, this is sample rate card. Here are your rates. What I'm going to, point out here is, for example, at the very bottom, is telling you that the rates are gross. So if these rates are gross, and again, this is a real media kit, it means that that 15% agency commission has been added to the rates. Now, the question is, if you're on the agency side, what is the agreement with the client? Do you get to keep that 15% or you don't? So it's just a matter of understanding, what are the agreements But if the media is issuing gross rates, that means that 15% agency commission, media commission is added to that particular rate. If you're dealing with net rates, then, you know, you can add the 15%, you know, and keep it, or to the budget. Again, that becomes math. Okay, so just see the module Media Bible for more terms. The one thing that I want to mention here, again, I'm not going to go through the media, the media math, but understand the difference between circulation and pass along readership. Again, I'm talking about physical print. Circulation means how many copies of that particular magazine are printed and distributed. But again, pass along readership is an additional metric, which means while you have this one physical copy, you know, how many readers per copy do you have? That is what is called pass along readership, because you're counting the person that maybe, you know, bought the magazine or received the magazine, but how many people are, you know, exposed to that particular, you know, printed copy. So again, if the media it's self-reported that we have X amount of pass along readership, then you have to take those numbers with a grain of salt. If it's audited, for example, by the AAM, then you can rest assured, if you're the buyer, that if they say, okay, we have a circulation of 100,000 and we distribute a combination of 50% newsstand, 50%, you know, subscription, and we have a pass along readership of 4, you can very easily do the math in saying, okay, we have 100,000. Again, if it's measured by the AAM, we have 100,000, you know, circulation with a 4 pass along readership. So we may have a potential 400,000 impressions. You know, and again, this is all potential because, you know, you do not know if you know, all 400,000 impressions saw the ad or skip the ad, you know, pass it over to the page. You never know. That's why media, for the most part, is potential exposure and not necessarily real exposure. Okay, so remember that if you are dealing with digital versions of magazines, then you're going to have KPIs like impressions, subscriptions, but add the digital KPIs like unique visitors or, you know, click-through rate if you're running an ad, you know, that we're going to talk about when we get to the digital KPIs soon. And again, this is a calculation for pass along readership, so I'm not going to go through that. And also understand that in magazine, you may get a rate card like you see in the old magazine example. This is the media math for dealing with a magazine schedule if you're using a rate card. Always remember if that, you know, the rates are gross or net. For example, in this example, which is an actual rate card, see where it says general advertising rules, the rate card number, and then on the bottom it says the rates are gross. Okay, so you have to be very careful if you're dealing with net rates or you're dealing with gross rates. So again, I'm not going to go through all that. And let's, again, I'm going to cover this very shortly. Some of you may be dealing with national type of advertisers. Some of you may be working with agencies, or you may be the client and have a more local approach to media planning. Understand that when you're dealing with local markets, you have to be the market expert. So you have to know the population and the consumer base. You have to know the neighborhood composition. socioeconomically, again, the economic base. You have to understand what are the behavior patterns of that market, and you have to understand what is the media alternatives look like in that particular market. As I was explaining in print, you may have, all sorts of small local publications that reach the market effectively, or flyers, or, direct mail, etc. So I go one by one. If you want to know about the population or consumer base, what are the statistics and the trends for that population? What are the demographic trends in terms of age, income, education, composition, children in household and ages, of those children? What are the lifestyle trends? Is it a high rent or high home ownership? Again, it's like, creating a profile for the market so that you know how to address in terms of messaging, in terms of media platforms, etc. These are examples of what I mean by economic base. What are the tax bases? What are the retail sales in that market? What are the employment statistics? Is it a tourism type of market or not? And it's interesting. I'm going to make a side note because I was involved in a promotion. I was overseeing this promotion for the launch of a program in a marketplace. It was a TV station that was promoting the launch of a of a program. And the interesting thing is that they wanted to go to high traffic locations, and the client, which was the station, decided that they wanted to do a mall like installation with monitors so that people would stop and look and sample the programming, in which I thought was a great idea. And, and they decided to go along. So we did this in South Florida, but what blew me away was, again, the type of composition of the traffic in each mall that we chose. And one of those malls, maybe if you're in South Florida, you'll understand what I mean. But there's a mall here in South Florida called the Dolphin Mall, which is like an outlet mall. So it's like very high traffic, so we chose 3 malls. But what was interesting to me was the composition of that traffic, of that audience. You had malls where the audience was very local. Like we chose a mall in Hialeah, which is another market here, that was perfect. But I thought that maybe that was not the best choice because I didn't know the traffic for that particular mall. But more important than the traffic was the composition. Now the Dolphin Mall, the outlet mall, had a humongous traffic, but the composition of that traffic tended to be a lot of tourism. That's why it triggered that thought. It was a lot of tourists that would come, or from other countries, to buy, because it was an outlet mall. So the fact that we were promoting a local program was that was the mall that was least effective for what we were trying to do. Why? Because if you're promoting a local program, that was not the right venue to do so, because the composition of that traffic tended to be more transient or tourist. Okay, so these are the things you have to understand. Behavior patterns, again, talking about traffic and the population taste and the shopping behaviors. Media alternatives, what does that local market have to offer, that in terms of medium. You can segment by geography, ethnicity, professional, lifestyle, age, And how do you find this data? Well, you can develop, your own profiles, but always remember that media, because media invests in research, media can be a great, resource to get you that type of information that you may need if you're the buyer or the planner. Market research, you can do primary, which is the one that you do. You can go, again, we use that example of the local programming that we were trying to promote with these installations and monitors, but we use it for market research as well. So people that came in, asking them questions if they wanted to see, the program. You can use those interactions with audiences to your advantage, or you can use secondary sources that may be free. Some of them, again, may be syndicated and paid, like government report, industry reports. Remember that you can do surveys, you can do focus groups, you can do mall intercept type of questionnaires, you can do one-on-ones. So these are all types of different, research that you can do to create that profile. And these are just questions to ask. So again, use this as a template if you're doing anything, local market, education, income. These are just questions that I'm giving you so that you create these templates should you desire to use, this type of questionnaire to create your profile. Okay, so, and the other thing, again, refer to the module Media Bible for more of these terms. So just understand that, there's something else called direct response. Direct response can be, running a campaign in order to get an immediate and direct response from an audience. So for example, in broadcast, your ultimate example is, the infomercials. Infomercials is, you probably have seen them, operators are standing by. I've had a lot of direct response type of clients when I was in the media world. And literally, if you're in broadcast and you're placing a campaign for a direct response client, we literally had to place the contracts, call the client or send them, their times, so this day you're running at these specific times, because then that was given to the direct response company, because operators had to be standing by. And again, we were dealing sometimes with national clients, but the campaigns were very local. So in Miami, the times were different than in LA or Boston or New York. So in print, you can have longer format articles, which I've used very effectively. Actually, I used that for a campaign that I did for Procter & Gamble, which are called advertorials. You probably have heard the terms, but advertorials are these articles that read like an article, but in essence, it kind of, wraps around a sales message. Okay, so promotional marketing. Again, we talked a little bit about promotion when we talked about radio, but understand that promotions are very big, and now you add social media to it, and that has become a must in media plans. So moving on, also understand that when you're dealing with supermarket and consumer packaged goods, you have to add KPIs, such as the ACV, or all commodity volume. Sometimes media planners have to deal with these type of KPIs. Sometimes that becomes a little bit too over or too sophisticated, but also understand that you may have to deal with some of these concepts. So again, because I have to keep so much to cover, and I have to keep, you know, the information very top line. These are things that I'm throwing out there, that if you have to deal with these things, again, now you know, just dig a little deeper and learn more about that particular, you know, concept. Again, PR, you know, you have a couple of articles that deal with, you know, PR KPIs. The best thing is the PRSA, join a chapter, become a PRSA involved professional if you are more on that earned media side. But also remember that earned and pay, those areas are becoming blurred. So rather than feeling that you're a PR professional or you're an advertising professional, think that you're a media or communication strategist, okay? And these are, you know, some metrics, the advertising value equivalence, or the AVE. These are, you know, kind of, they have become controversial, because basically what the AVE suggests is that space and time occupied by earned media, if it's, you know, you're looking at it from a PR perspective, you can quantify by using how much does that earned space or time would have cost if you would have bought it. Again, AVE can be something that you may think on those terms, you know, so how much would this campaign of earn would have cost if they would have paid for it. Also understand that, you know, there's other KPIs and accepted metrics like web traffic, return on investment, inbound leads, the sentiment of the earned media, the tone, the impressions, the mentions, the prominence, the geo reach, any digital or social KPIs, etc. Okay. And I'm not going to cover all this. The only reason why I have this here is that especially if you come from the journalism world, or you're, you know, a writer, you may still think of space in publication in terms of column inches. I had a student probably like a couple of years ago that he was a journalist, and technically he thought about how many words did he have to write when given the space for his article in column inches. I'm not going to necessarily test you on this media math, but I'm leaving it here just in case you get confronted with the column inch system. Now, let me make sure that you also understand that the way that print is moving is not necessarily in column inches, but in what is called the modular system. And what this means is that print is going to price, you know, based on a third of a page, a fourth of a page, half a page, you know, and they're going to tell you, okay, for a half a page, like you saw in the rate card, in the print rate card, a half a page in this publication is going to cost you X amount of dollars, and you create a half a page, black and white, you know, color for color, or what have you. So print, rather than doing the column inches, they're using what is called the modular system. Suffice to say, I'm keeping the column inch because some of you may be writers or you're journalists, and that's the way you think in column inches. This is how many words I have to write. Just understand that there used to be the modular and the column inch system. Now, rate cards are, you know, and again, column inch is more like newspaper. So I believe this is, let me just make sure. Yeah, this is the last. Again, I'm not going to quiz you on this, but I'm leaving it here so that, you know, you understand, you know, that this exists. You may encounter it. But anyway, good luck. Remember that if you have any questions, you can always come to see me during my virtual office hours, or you can request an appointment, okay? Okay.